Hey, it's Damon. I hope that you feel as I do, that the hundreds of interviews on the Who Am I Really podcast are a wealth of knowledge about the experiences of adopted people. Well, I'm working on book 2, based on what my guests have shared here on the show. I never thought I'd be writing another book, but it feels like the right thing to do. And I'm happy to say, book 2 has been going really well. I make time to write as much as I can about what I've learned from this incredible collection of adoptee stories. To give you some context on what book 2 will be about, my writing explores what it's like growing up in adoption, our relationships with our adoptive families, the myriad catalysts that make us want to search for our birth families, various methods of searching, and how adoption reunions unfold, and of course, how we are impacted by the journey. That was truly an oversimplification of book 2. Anyway, I have to say, I'm really enjoying pouring myself into synthesizing our various adoption experiences and sharing our collective lessons learned. If this sounds like a book that you'll want to dig into, then go to whoamireallypodcast.com/book2 and add your email address to my list to stay up to date. I will share occasional updates on how writing is going and reach out to you with publishing plans, publicity events, discount codes, and other cool stuff. Again, go to whoamireallypodcast.com/book2. Okay, I'm ready. Let's go.
I looked at that envelope and said, when you open this envelope, your life will never be the same. Do you really want to do it? So I held it there much longer than I expected. And I said, yes, I want to do it because I want to know. I don't care if it goes well. I don't know if it goes badly. This is something I need to do.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and today you're going to meet Ken. He called me from New Jersey. Ken grew up in a mixed home of biological and an adopted sibling, where Ken was loved and treated equally. But when his son was born, Ken felt that urge to learn more about his birth mother. When he found the woman living nearby, she answered Ken's phone call with inspiring words that expressed her expectation of that moment finally happening for her one day. Ken said there was a moment with his birth mother when it felt like time was standing still, and that with her, he finally feels like he can be himself without people-pleasing behavior. This is Ken's journey. Ken grew up 45 minutes from New York City in the New Jersey suburbs. His family was a mix of children who were biological to his parents, an older brother and sister, then Ken and his younger brother, also adopted like himself. Ken and his younger brother always knew they were adopted, so there was nothing mysterious about how their family was formed. He said there was lots of love in their home and adoption was just part of their lives. However, Ken said there were times when he was curious about adoption, though he didn't even realize he was thinking about it.
One of the things that kind of strikes me is people have always told me from the youngest age, I created this myth that my birth mother was a crossing guard, that she needed to give me up so that she could help the kids go to school and take care of them. And obviously she couldn't do that if she had to raise me. And I think that's very interesting because as a very young person, your first outside authority from your family is like the school crossing guard.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting how that kind of snuck in. I didn't even know I was wondering, but you've got to believe, Damon, you're a bright guy. You've talked to a lot of people. We're trying to fill in puzzles without even realizing we're filling them in.
Yeah. The brain abhors a vacuum, right? When there's an absence of information, you just insert something. And of course, as a child, you would think something along the lines of what you said. My birth mother was this important pillar in the community. So of course she had to let me go so she could go do her job, as important as it was to help the kids get across the street. That's fascinating. So in terms of your family, you've named several siblings. Did you say some were biological and some were adopted?
My two older were biological to my parents. Brother 5 years older, sister 4 years older.
Gotcha. And then one younger sibling who was adopted.
Yes, correct. From Korea.
Yeah. So tell me about your family dynamic. How did everybody get along? Did you guys look alike? What were your similarities and differences?
We got along well. We got along really well, very loving. I will tell you, I've always been very insecure about the way I look. And they were Italian Irish. I'm Italian Irish genetically. So there was resemblance. But, going back, like I'll say right now, I can't look in the mirror like to comb my hair and do stuff like that because I'm very uncomfortable with the way I look because I don't
Mm.
look like them. I didn't really even notice how it was happening when I was younger. I looked a little different. My brain worked a little differently. Not better or worse, not smarter, dumber. Just noticed things differently. But there was a lot of love. I don't know your exact age with siblings, etc. 5 years and 4 years is a pretty big difference when you're little. So my brother and sister, now we're peers, but back then there was a pretty big age gap. So they were loving, good, but it wasn't like partners in crime, like when you're a little closer in age. And then when my brother came, that was much later. And it really, the five of us were so much older than him. It was very difficult. I'm guessing it was difficult for him to feel like a bonding sibling as opposed to almost like we were aunts and uncles.
Yeah, I know what you mean. In my own family, my two older children are the adoptees, and the age difference between them and my son is about 11 years. That's a whole generation. So
Yeah.
you definitely know that this is the difference between a child in elementary school and a child at the end of high school or whatever. So I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of your youngest sibling.
Mm.
In terms of how your brain worked differently, I picked up what you said. It wasn't, dumb or smarter. It was just different. Tell me a little bit about those differences in how you work and how they work.
Well, I'll tell you, theoretically, I have this theory that as adoptees, we're born, we go to a family, and unlike a biological child, everything makes sense. You've heard the voices, you've seen the faces, everything just makes sense. It's all familiar. But an adopted child, from day one, it doesn't make sense. So you have to start unraveling puzzles, figuring out why are things different. So I think I've met a lot of adoptees, and we're very good like puzzle makers. We're picking up on hyper clues and tiny things and looking for patterns, looking for things because since our birth, things don't make sense in a way that they do for some other people. So we're always trying to figure that out. I've even said if you gave a baby infant 5-pound dumbbell curls and they did 5-pound curls, they'd be incredibly strong. That's what our minds did from the moment we were born.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't want to ramble, but I'll tell you my example is in my family, there's birthdays and months. And if you multiply the birth month by the birthday, for me and my brother, it's the same. For my two children, birth month by birthday is the same as each other, which is a multiple of mine. So when I say looks differently, I tell this to people and they look at them insane for figuring it out, insane for even thinking to figure it out. But that's just the way my mind works. It goes into things like that. And
Yeah.
my family does that. They have very high intelligence in other regards, but that's just not the way they think.
That's really fascinating. You're looking for the synchronicities in life in a variety
Yeah.
of ways, and it doesn't sound like they were necessarily searching for those kinds of things.
No, and whether it's biological or, like I said, the adoption experience where you're trying to find things, it's interesting.
Yeah, that to me, I don't know where your story's going to go, but to me, that sounds biological, right? That's the kind of thing that you would find is a quirk of family members to think in creative ways like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Tell me about what you were into as a kid. Were outdoorsy? Were you athletic? Were you academic? What kinds of things were you into as a kid?
I did well in school without trying. I painted within the lines, colored within the lines. I was well behaved. I was the pleasing adoptee. I was blessed by loving sports and cursed by not being good at them. So I absolutely love basketball. I'm 54. I still play. And, God just made me terrible at it, but that's okay. I still love it. Yeah, I played in high school team and pick up all through college, and I still play, but I'm just terrible at it.
That's pretty funny.
What's interesting also is I played basketball for 45 years at this point, and then a couple of years ago I was having trouble with my back, so I said, let me do something different. So I started swimming laps, jumped in the pool, swam a quarter mile. I was like, that was easy. Next day, a half mile. That was easy. Next day, a mile. I'm like, wait, when does this get hard? I learned in reunion my birth mother was a college swimmer.
That's crazy. Wow. Oh, that's really interesting. Ken said his parental relationships were great and they treated him just like one of their biological children. His parents were supportive and loving, showing up to all his basketball games regardless of how well or poorly he played. But one of his random rules about his homework drove his mother crazy. When Ken was a kid, he decided that if his homework could not be completed by the time he got off the school bus at home, then it wasn't getting done. All young Ken wanted to do was shoot hoops when he got home from school. Ken's family relationships in adoption were great, so there wasn't much at home that was pushing Ken to search for his biological family. But as things go for many of us, the birth of his son was a catalytic moment.
When my son was born in 99, and for the first time, I saw eyes looking at me that were my eyes. Just the tiniest ember started to get a little oxygen. I started to realize, wait, there's something here. And then as he got older, and then my daughter was born, it's not just the visual, seeing myself visually, but also the way they would act, their tendencies, really starting to seeing that and noticing at that point that it didn't exist for me growing up. And started making an itch that was very faint, stronger and stronger. And then as I started doing that, I started rethinking my life from the perspective of an adoptee, starting to realize it probably made a bigger impact on my life than I thought. And it was a growing, slow process.
What did you think about in terms of this sudden connection to your mirroring that was missing previously? This is one of our challenges is as adoptees, we don't necessarily see ourselves in the people we are reared by, loving or not. And I'm wondering, so what did you think when you reflected back on that lack of mirroring from your life?
I didn't understand it. It was a very slow process. I wear glasses, which I'm not wearing right now, but your whole life, until I got them, everything was blurry. And then you put the glasses on and it's clear. But then you realize, how did I never notice it was blurry before? Because nothing ever seemed wrong until you were able to see clear. And this is what I saw then is, got great people, but, there were tendencies I was going, maybe there were some needs I needed as a child that maybe an adoptee has, or maybe somebody with different biology has that weren't recognized growing up. Like I now realize I was much more sensitive to rejection, to being hints that you're not wanted, whether it's being cut from a team or a girlfriend not responding or just friends not calling me back. In retrospect, I realized how hypersensitive I was to many of those things.
That's really interesting. And I'm glad you raised those things because it's something that people don't really focus on. But when you do become heightened in your awareness of them, you start to realize, yeah, I did respond in a more hypersensitive way than most people did. And I love the analogy that you gave about putting on glasses. I wear glasses too, that's the same age as you.
Yeah.
And it's astonishing how, your vision fades slowly usually, and you don't really notice it. So you can kind of power through for a while. And then it fades enough that you get to the point where you go, oh man, I need some help here. And then when you put the glasses on, you go, holy crap, I didn't realize how much I was missing.
Yeah.
And that's what you're describing is this smoldering ember of a clue of your mirroring starting to clue you into the fact that you didn't have it when you were growing up. And then you started to analyze more and more a little bit about your life. That's a really wonderful analogy of the glasses, that when you finally looked at your adoption from the perspective of being an adoptee, not just that it was a good thing, but that you were, for all intents and purposes, an outsider in a different family, no disrespect to your family. It's a game-changing realization. It's really that putting the glasses on, it really does help you to see a lot of things more clearly.
And David, what's so interesting is as that's happening, you see it with your children being born and raising. And that's the exact moment when life goes to hell. And I mean that in the best possible way. When your children, it's all about the kids. I don't know your situation. It's about, oh my, are we going to pay the mortgage? Are we going to pay the rent? Are we going to do this? Oh my God, they want to go to Disney. They have a game. They have to do this. So as you're realizing that, your life is just becoming so busy that you don't even have time to really process it in the correct way because you're drowning. You're not swimming. You're in a
Right.
wonderful way, but it's interesting how it all happens at the same time.
Yeah, that's funny. And it's also comical to think that this person who has said they jumped in the pool with back problems and swam effortlessly is drowning in life. There's a funny
Yeah,
kind of irony of that metaphor. So
there
then
is.
this is you going through life with your kids looking like yourself. Ken said his life started to get more under control as his children got a bit older. In 2016, Ken read an article about adopted people in New Jersey getting access to their birth records. After reading about the access other adoptees had to their information, Ken went to the post office to get a money order for the application fee for his adoption records to be released. Ken wanted the information he was entitled to, but wasn't ready for the transaction to show up in his joint account with his wife. He wasn't ready for her to know he was searching quite yet. Ken was unsure if he was going to follow through on the possible journey, but his adoption was becoming Ken was unsure if he was going to follow through on this possible journey, but his adoption was becoming a bigger issue in his life. The following January, Ken received his birth certificate.
I saw my birth mother's name. I saw father, none. I found out when I was born, where I was born, and the name. And from there, it just, I'll tell you, I was looking at the envelope before I opened it and saying to myself, I'm the type of person that I went to college because I went to high school. I did this because life expects. Like you just take the next step because that's what life tells you to do. Now, somebody has told me this might be what I'm describing, might be intentionality. But like one of the few times in my life, I looked at that envelope and said, when you open this envelope, your life will never be the same. Do you really want to do it? So I held it there much longer than I expected. And I said, yes, I want to do it because I want to know. I don't care if it goes well. I don't know if it goes badly. This is something I need to do. So I made a conscious decision. So then I got the name. And then there's this, as you and many adoptees know, there's a series of steps that you have to take until you get to reunion. And everyone knows I made the conscious decision. Do I want to take this next step? Am I doing it just because I need to figure out the puzzle? Or am I doing it because this is a good thing for me as a person? I probably end up doing everything I would have just done if I was cruising down the river. But it's an overwhelming thing for us to bring into our lives. And I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
forgot the question.
Yeah. I love the intentionality of every step because there's a lot to be lost in just blasting forward. I've spoken to many adoptees who said, I wished I had slowed down and just thought about this from a different perspective, considered his, her point of view, whatever the thing is. And I like what you said about wondering if it's the right step for you, right? Do I really want to do this? That's an important thought process. So what happens next? You've seen your birth mother's name. I would imagine that was very moving. Tell me the story of how you went from opening this envelope with intention to any level of trying to find your folks.
Well, there's this thing, it's pretty popular now called Google. And
Heard of it, yeah.
yeah,
Seems to be taking off.
it seems I'm trying to get in on the ground floor. I just started Googling the name, Googling and finding, and it was so hard because, back then records aren't what they are now.
Online, Ken found some information indicating there was a woman with his birth mother's name who could be about the right age based on the 1963 elementary school yearbook information he found with her and her twin sister. Ken was able to find nearly everything about his birth mother except her phone number. Back then, you could pay $25 to have someone's phone number exposed online. Ken didn't feel like paying the fee. For days, he tried to figure out other ways to get the woman's number. Then, one day while swimming laps in the pool, he realized he was crazy for wasting time and energy trying to save the $25 for a phone call that could be so important.
So I paid the money. I got the $25. I got her phone number. And then becomes, Damon, how do you make that phone call? What do you do? It's like, the most important thing in your life. But you could go through every textbook. There's no way to do it. There's no best practices. There's no anything. What I ended up doing was I called thinking I had the right person, which I did. Well, what do you say? So I said, hello, I was born on this date in this hospital. Does that mean anything to you? And all I hear on the other end of the phone is an obviously older woman say, oh my God, I always knew you'd find me.
Oh my gosh.
So we had a little chat there. And then I actually think that made arrangements the next day for me to take her out to breakfast. She lived about an hour and a half away. And
Wow.
then,
Tell me about your chat. What do you remember anything that you guys said to each other?
no, not on the
Funny
phone.
how that happened.
Yeah, it's adrenaline. The adrenaline wipes your memory. So I really don't remember anything about that phone call. I do know, if you know New Jersey at all, there's something called the Garden State Parkway, and there's exits that are numbered based on mile marker. And I had to get off exit 105, and I was going to meet her, and she was 5 minutes from the exit. I've driven the Parkway literally 1,000 times. I drove past her exit just because my mind was just so non-functional at that point. So I had to circle around and come back, and eventually we went out to took her out. And at that point, I remember more of that conversation. It was a good conversation. She was thrilled. I was thrilled. It was awkward, but it was really nice.
Yeah. When you go into this restaurant, set the scene for me. What did you see and how did it go to see her for the first time?
Well, I met her at her apartment, and I rang the bell, and she came to the door, and she was dressed up nicely, not like formally, but dressed nice and put together. And Damon, let me ask you, hi, nice to meet you, shake hands. Like, it's just weird. So we're just standing and just hello, hello. And then she lunges at me and gives me the hug. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay. So then I escort her to the car doing the old prom formal with the elbow. It's
being a
not,
gentleman.
yes, it's something, but it's not too much. So we do that. Interestingly, if you let me sidetrack for a second, we had a little conversation just in the walk to the car where I mentioned that before I went to law school, I was a bartender for many years. And she says, oh, I was a bartender for many years also. So I'm like, okay, of course. And she goes, we start talking about drinking. And I mentioned, which is true, I've never had a drink in my life. I had a drink, a sip of champagne at my wedding and a beer on my son's 21st birthday. Other than that, I never had alcohol. Why? I don't know, just always had this feeling. So I mentioned that just as because you're nervous and you're talking and the Lloyd Dobler effect. So I'm talking, and she like literally stops and grabs my arm and said, what did you say? I said, I've never had a drink. And I tell her, she goes, I cannot tell you how many problems alcohol has caused in this family, especially with the men. She said, there's something, not all of them, but there's a lot of men in this family that cannot shake the bottle, including my biological paternal grandfather and other people. So we both had went right into a very deep conversation about all of that and just how curious that was.
Wow.
Then we go to the restaurant. We just sat down and talked, about the process, about whether I had siblings, biological siblings, about the thought process that went into signing the papers, etc.
That's amazing. Wow. It must have been such a relief for her to hear you say that you had not struggled with alcohol, given what she knew about her own family and the men, finding whatever, searching for whatever they were searching for in the bottle. That must have been such a relief.
She really was. And like you could feel the relief from her because we think of it from our perspective. We think of things from the adopting parent's perspective, but from the birth parent, they relinquish and then they have no idea. So
Yeah.
your mind just often fills in the worst case scenarios. So she was thrilled with my adopting parents for having done such a supportive job, loving me and getting me to a good place.
Yeah, that's really incredible. So how did your visit end then, and what happened next?
We just agreed to stay in contact. Just I have two biological sisters and a biological brother, younger than me, all younger than me. They always knew about me. I was always referred to. No secret there. She spoke about me openly. It wasn't a secret. And then we just agreed to stay in touch. And eventually she indicated she really wanted to meet my adopting mother, my mom. So a couple weeks later, we had a dinner with me and the two of them. And since then, my wife and kids, especially my daughter, have gotten close with them, with the
That's
biological family as
amazing.
well.
How was that dinner to sit there with the mother who raised you and the mother who gave birth to you? How was that for you?
Everybody was wonderful, but it was proof of Einstein's theory that time is relative. Because I think, according to my watch, it lasted about an hour and a half. If you asked me to guess how long it was, I would say about 73 and a half hours. Because every moment was just so awkward and so uncomfortable. And nobody said anything inappropriate, and everybody was great. But I just really, literally felt like my soul was splitting because it was so tense within me. And listen, my mom has been great, but it's not easy for her. And when
Right.
you could see it not being easy, even when she's being supportive and good, you could see that it's not easy. And as an adoptee who's a pleaser, it's very difficult on me knowing I'm putting her in that position because I take on things I shouldn't. But it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, and good on her for going through with it. Some people can't face that, but it sounds like she knew you wanted it. It sounds like she was thankful for the son that you were and are, and wanted to do it, even though that was going to be difficult for her. That's a powerful thing that she submitted to doing, and
Right.
I commend her for that, as I'm sure you did as well.
So do I. And it wasn't all unicorns and puppies. But one of the things I also kept telling myself is I had 50 years to prepare for this. She had 3 days. So it's very different for her. And sometimes I've been told that I give people too much latitude, too much forgiveness, too much understanding of their perception. But I do like to try and be fair. And to be fair, it must have been very difficult for her because she didn't see any of this coming. All those struggles that I was telling you about earlier, like a wonderful adoptee son, I hated. So they had no idea.
So tell me then, how did you share this with them? You've said, your children were born, you started to examine mirroring. You started to think about this more. You didn't even tell your wife you were doing this. You went out and got a money order or whatever so that your bank account wouldn't show this
Yes.
particular expenditure. You were hiding the search quite a bit. How did you broach this with your adoptive mother? You said you gave her 3 days. Tell me a little bit about how that discussion went.
Well, the 3 days was a metaphorical, a biblical 3 days, not much
Sure,
time.
right.
But when it when the birth certificate came, at that point I told my wife. So at this point I was starting to come out. And it inadvertently was divulged to my son, who was 18. And my son's amazing. He's a wonderful kid. Now he's 24, but there's just no ability to trust him not saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Once he knew, I knew I had to tell my mom because if we were at a dinner and he said something and it came out like that, it would have been a total disaster. So I was very upset that he knew. Not that he's not entitled to anything, but just because now I couldn't control the message. In retrospect, I don't know what I've ever had the guts to tell my mom. I don't know because it was so difficult, but I had to. And that's what I ended up doing is telling her and, slowly, just little bits. I'm learning, I'm looking and things of that nature. So she knew, but, to this day, I wonder if things hadn't developed like that, whether I would have ever been able to tell her.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you contemplate how you're sometimes forced into a situation, and
Yeah.
then upon reflection, you think to yourself, God, you sound almost like you're glad you were forced because you just don't know if you would have ever done it. I've had situations like that. I understand where you're coming from. Naturally, Ken's curiosity turned to locating his birth father. He had seen his birth certificate, which had no identifying information about the man. But Ken had also met his birth mother, who divulged that she had been friends with Ken's birth father, but they did not maintain a relationship. After she got pregnant, Ken's birth father went off to college away from home. This guy had a very common name, so Ken gathered what information he could and eventually tracked him down.
I will say my birth mother is from one of those big Italian families in Neptune, New Jersey. I don't know where you grew up, but there's certain families that just everybody knows somebody by that name. because there's a lot of them. And it's, oh, my older brother played baseball with them. Oh, my younger sister was on. There's just, oh, that was one of those families. So I called him up. And again, another very tough call, and said, yeah, I want to talk to you about my birth mother, Pamela, and her last name is Menzo. And he said, Menzo, never heard the name. Can't help you. So listen, I immediately knew that he was just going to deny, because there's no way he grew up in that town and didn't know the name. So I just let it go, and I haven't pulled at that string anymore. And I'm curious what your feeling has been. I have recognized it myself, less psychological churn about my biological father than I did about my biological mother. I have curiosity, but it's not just the primal wound or the real trauma that is attached to the biological mother.
Yeah, there's so much associated with your biological mother. When you just think quite literally of the word biological, it inherently means that you've come from this person genetically, but in the biological sense, we are so tied to our mothers. You grow in her womb. You hear her heartbeat and voice every single day. Everything that she does, you're doing with her. That bond is impossible to not be curious about. And I can't even imagine. I've spoken to a few adoptees who have told me that they did have a curiosity about their birth father over their birth mother. And everything in life is on a bell curve. Some people are going to lean towards one versus the other. I think there's a significant skew towards birth mother searches. But it doesn't surprise me that you weren't super interested in finding and knowing this person, right? For my own story, when I learned from my birth mother who she thought was my birth father, it turned out she had the wrong individual. But when she thought it was this other guy, I heard the story of how they broke up and he wasn't supportive. And I was like, I don't even need to know this dude. And I didn't even, think twice about it. I will tell you, Ken, though, that when my curiosity got sparked was after she passed, because for me, my thought process was, I'm going to go my entire life never having been face to face with the man who was responsible for me being on this earth. And I wasn't really ready to reconcile that. I wasn't really ready to live with that. When she passed, I realized there was nothing I could do to hurt her feelings or drum up any bad memories for her, because she was gone. So anything that happened was totally on me. So I decided to go for it. And I totally respect where you are. Like, if the guy's going to deny, fine. If you don't feel any kind of connection to him, whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if your mind changed over time.
And to me, that's part of the beauty of this process. It evolves. Like, I really talk to people. I am nowhere near the end of this process. Yeah, you've heard the expression coming out of the fog. Of course, if I came out of the fog, I went into another fog. So it's just, I'm curious as nature happens, and I just want to address things as they come. And I would not be surprised if I had the same sense of feelings that you did when that happens.
Yeah. And, the other thing is, you talked a little bit in the early part of this discussion about how your life had its own priorities in it, right?
Yeah.
And if this isn't a priority, there's no need to force it. You know what I mean? It's just, as you've said, you take things as they come. There's no real reason to push on this guy and his identity. To me, his response was clear enough that it was him, right? Because when someone has never heard of someone, they're not as definitive as that, right? When they come out and say, never heard of her, it's a very different answer than, wait, say that name again? I'm not sure if that's familiar. Like a clear contemplation. You know what I'm saying? If he had played along and been like, I don't know. That sounds, say, who was it? How do I know this person?
What'd you say? Mano, Marno? What'd you say?
He didn't do any of that.
Somebody, but no, it was.
Yeah.
Damon, I want to circle back. You were talking about being the biology, the breathing, the heartbeat, the voice. And that circles back to what I was saying earlier about us being puzzle solvers. Like, when we're born, that was our entire universe. In my book, I call it the motherverse, right? That's the baby's entire universe. And all of a sudden, there's no logic. The brain hasn't developed logic yet, and it's just ripped away. So the baby has to start figuring out, making sense of the world when the only thing they knew was gone. And that's how the brain starts developing these coping mechanisms. So I really like the way you said that, because it does tie into a lot of things I've wondered about in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm coming off of a wonderful conversation I just had with Dr. Bruce Perry. He is the co-author of What Happened to You. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but he co-authored this with Oprah Winfrey, and he is a trauma specialist. And what he has examined and what he talked about is that very idea that this immediate separation, if you were adopted at the time of birth and you were separated at birth, you've gone from your brain associating these rhythmic patterns of her life, her heartbeat, everything, to a complete and total disruption of everything that you knew. So the placing of a child on the chest to create the skin to skin bond also has the effect of re-establishing the heartbeat in the baby's brain, right?
Yeah.
That now that you're outside, the heartbeat is still here and it's still comforting to you. But I made the analogy yesterday, if you are taken from the mother's womb and now you're down the hall in a baby warmer and she's all the way over there in the recovery room, there's a trauma associated with the complete unfamiliarity of your new world.
Yeah.
And Dr. Perry was saying that in these early formative times of your life, the duration of a trauma and the timing of it, where it happens in your life, is of critical importance. He, points out that there's a significant difference between, a traumatic breakup with a girlfriend when you're 17 and you've got processes for dealing with rejection versus the traumatic separation of an infant from the mother at the time when the brain is just being introduced to the new world. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. And I love that word that you've coined, the motherverse. That's fascinating.
And when you're 1 hour old, 1 hour is 100% of your life. When you're 17 years old, it's, I'm not a math guy, someone can do the math,
Yeah.
but it's any part of your month. But that's your entire lived existence, 100%.
That's a really good point.
It took, I believe, about a week to 10 days for her to sign the adoption papers because she didn't want to sign them. So, and that's something we spoke about when we met that morning for breakfast, is she just absolutely did not want to sign the papers. But where she was living, she felt made it impossible to bring me home because of social pressures, Italian, Catholic, etc. And I'm told the only way they got her to sign was she had an uncle who was involved in law enforcement, really good guy, who knew a guy, who knew a guy, who was Italian, who knew a guy. So they made an arrangement where they guaranteed her I'd be adopted by an Italian family.
Oh, wow.
And whether it happened by coincidence or whatever, but that was important to her. So it's interesting. Like in those 10 days, I was in a hospital. She was in the hospitals and we were seeing each other so little. And she had to fight to actually see me because they didn't even want to connect with me because they didn't want to interfere with the process. So, like many of us, I was floating on an island for a little while.
Yeah. So from what you just said, it sounded like, though, she did fight to see you. So was it your understanding that you all saw each other a little bit during that 10-day period that you were both in the hospital?
That's what she told me, yeah.
Wow.
But just, a snippet or two.
Yeah, but still, that's the
It's
difference
something.
between a total severance of the relationship and like at least small sips of what could have been. That's really fascinating to hear. So what did you all talk about? I want to go back to the swimming thing. I thought that was so
Sure.
fascinating that you jumped in this pool and swam like a fish. Tell me about when you told her about your swimming prowess and what other kinds of similarities did you find between you and her?
The swimming, the bartending. Frankly, I grew up in a very good but conservative, within the lines, Catholic family. She's much more irreverent. She has much bigger issues with boundaries, as do I. The humor goes places it shouldn't go. Truly cringeworthy stuff. There was a lot of that. And she has joked, oh, if I raised you, you'd be a mess. Thank God we had normal people raise you. She's joked that. But there's just, like I said, there's things we see and we react the same way. And it's interesting. And I see it, sometimes you're too close to yourself, but I see her and my kids similarity. My daughter goes to college in the same town as her, and they've gotten to know each other a little bit. And you do see a little bit of, simpatico where they're on the same train tracks at times, which is nice.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So how's your relationship now?
It's good. We speak in contact regularly. She's a good person. Like me, she's a bit of a knucklehead, but she does her best. Everybody in the situation's loving and trying to do their best. I'll tell you what I was just thinking about in the pool yesterday was she's probably the first person that I felt really comfortable not trying to please. If she asks me to do something and I don't want to do it, I just say no. And I don't feel like I have to find a way to say yes. If she says something, which she has, which all people do, that irritates me, I'll tell her that irritates me. I don't want you doing that. And it's very strange because, part of it is starting this new life of myself, of knowing what I want going forward. And it's hard to do with people that have known you for a long time. It's hard to change direction. But when you're meeting people for the first time, it's a little easier. And that's part of her and part of the acceptance that what I always feared didn't happen actually happened, that there was unconditional love, that I wasn't going to be loved just because I behaved a certain way. I was loved because of what I was, which is almost empowering to be what you want to be and not feel like you have to please other people.
Yeah, empowering to be what you want to be. That's really cool. Wow, Ken. What's the name of your book?
I Will See You Again, Hearts Will Sing. It's actually a novel, unlike a lot of the really great memoirs out there. And what it does is it starts with the story of an 18-year-old girl in the Jersey Shore who's living a great life and gets pregnant and gets kicked out of her house and is forced to give a baby up for adoption. And the other story is a man in his 50s in current day who has an itch and decides to ask for his birth certificate. So it's about how her life possesses, how his search goes towards ultimately finding her, and then their reunification.
That's amazing. I love it. I Will See You Again. Awesome. Really cool, Ken. Thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Damon. It's been really great. Thank you.
Of course. My pleasure. You take care, man. All right?
You too.
All right. All the best. Bye-bye. Hey, it's me. Ken had a great childhood, defiant against his excessive schoolwork, challenged to excel at basketball, which he loved, but treated equally in his family of adoptees and biological children. Like many adoptees, he was catalyzed to search when he looked into the faces and features of his own children. When Ken found his birth mother, she said she always knew he would find her. I loved hearing that Ken was able to report that he had never been a drinker, as I'm sure that piece of his future was a grave concern to his birth mother. And I really appreciated hearing that his adoptive mother took a deep breath and prepared herself to meet Ken's birth mother. That's not an easy relationship to confront after decades as Ken's mother, and Ken admitted that he was uncomfortable, like time had uncontrollably slowed. But everyone made it through, and Ken learned that his people-pleasing tendencies can be pushed aside and replaced with feelings of natural comfort when he is interacting with his birth mother. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Ken's journey that inspired you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn, who am I really?